The alarm pierced through the quiet hum of Research Station Kepler 442 like a blade through silk. Dr. Elena Vasquez looked up from her xenobiology samples, her coffee cup trembling slightly in her hand as the red warning lights bathed the laboratory in an ominous glow. "Unknown vessel approaching station perimeter," the AI announced in its maddeningly calm voice. "Trajectory unstable. Impact probability 70 to 3%. Elena rushed to the nearest viewport, her heart hammering against her ribs. In the star-scattered darkness beyond, a small craft tumbled end over end, its hull scorched and bleeding atmosphere in ghostly white streams. It wasn't any design she recognized, certainly not human, and not from any of the 3 allied species they regularly traded with. "Chen, are you seeing this?" she called to her research partner over the comm. "Doctor!" Marcus Chen's voice crackled back from the engineering section, already tight with concentration. "Already on it. Whatever that thing is, it's dying fast. Life support is failing, and the pilot isn't responding to our hails." Elena watched the alien craft's erratic dance through space, its movements becoming more sluggish with each passing second. There was something almost pitiful about it, like watching a wounded bird trying to fly with a broken wing. "Distance to impact?" she asked. 2 minutes, maybe less." "Elena, there are life signs aboard. Multiple signatures, but they're weak. Very weak." The research station had been humanity's furthest outpost for 3 years now, positioned at the edge of what they'd optimistically called the frontier zone. It was supposed to be humanity's gateway to the unexplored regions of the galaxy, a stepping stone to new worlds and new civilizations. Instead, it had become a lonely beacon in the void, visited only by supply ships and the occasional patrol vessel. Elena made a decision that would haunt her dreams and change the course of galactic history, though she had no way of knowing it at the time. "Bring them in," she said. "Elena, we don't know what. Bring them in, Marcus. Now." The next few minutes passed in a blur of controlled chaos. The station's modest tractor beam locked onto the dying ship, drawing it toward the small docking bay like a spider reeling in its web. Elena and the rest of the station's 12-person crew gathered in the bay, medical kits in hand and weapons discreetly concealed. When the alien vessel finally settled onto the deck with a grinding screech of tortured metal, Elena got her first close look at it. The ship was roughly the size of a human shuttle, but its design was completely alien, all flowing curves and organic lines, as if it had been grown rather than built. The hull was a deep blue-green color, though most of it was now blackened by whatever catastrophe had brought it here. "Atmosphere in the ship is toxic," reported Dr. Piscopo. Sarah Kim, the station's chief medical officer, running her scanner over the craft. "But there's definitely someone alive in there." Multiple someones. The ship's airlock was a puzzle of alien engineering, but Chen managed to interface his tablet with what appeared to be the opening mechanism. The hatch dilated open like an iris, releasing a puff of acrid, sulfur-scented gas that made everyone step back. Elena was the first to peer inside. What she saw would be burned into a memory forever. The ship's interior was in ruins. Cables hung loose from the ceiling, sparking occasionally. The walls were slick with some kind of alien biological fluid. And there, in the pilot's seat, was a creature unlike anything Elena had ever seen. It was vaguely humanoid, but clearly not human. Its skin was a pale gray-blue, almost translucent, revealing a network of dark veins beneath. Its head was elongated, with large, multifaceted eyes that took up nearly half its face. 4 arms hung limply at its sides, each ending in delicate, finger-like appendages. But what made Elena's breath catch wasn't the alien's appearance. It was the 3 smaller versions of the creature huddled against its body, their tiny forms barely moving. "Oh my God, Dr. Michael," Kim whispered behind her. "Are those children?" The adult alien's eyes suddenly fluttered open, fixing on Elena with an intensity that made her take an involuntary step backward. Those eyes were like looking into the depths of an ocean, deep, ancient, and filled with a pain that transcended species. The creature's mouth moved, producing a series of clicks and whistles that the station's universal translator struggled to process. After a moment, the AI's voice echoed through the bay. "Please, my children, they hunger. I offer everything I have. Please." The alien's 4 arms moved weakly, pulling the 3 smaller beings closer to its body. Elena could see now that the children were in terrible condition. Their skin was pale even by their species standards, their eyes dull and unfocused.
"They're starving, Doctor,"
Kim said, running her medical scanner over the group. All of them. The adult is in slightly better condition, but those children, Eleanor, they don't have long. Eleanor looked at the alien mother, for that's clearly what she was, and felt something twist in her chest. The universal nature of a parent's love was something that apparently transcended species barriers. The way the creature held her children, the desperate plea in her alien eyes, the way she offered everything for their sake. Elena had seen the same expression on the face of every human mother she'd ever known. "What can we give them?" Elena asked. "What do they need?" Doctor? Kim was already working, taking tissue samples and running them through her portable analyzer. Their biochemistry is silicon-based rather than carbon-based, but there are enough similarities. I think I can synthesize something that will help, at least temporarily. The alien mother watched their every move with those enormous eyes, her breathing shallow and rapid. "When, Doctor?" Kim approached with a scanner. She didn't resist, though Elena could see the fear in her posture. "It's okay," Elena said softly, though she wasn't sure the translator could convey the gentle tone she was aiming for. "We're going to help you." The alien's eyes widened, and she made a series of rapid clicks and chirps. "Not understand," came the translated response. "Why help? What payment?" I have. The creature's voice broke, and she gestured weakly at her own body. "I have myself. Take me. Save children." Elena felt her throat tighten. The implication was clear, and it made her stomach turn. This creature was so desperate to save her children that she was offering herself, her body, her life, whatever these humans might want from her. "No payment," Elena said firmly, kneeling down so she was at eye level with the alien. "We help because it's what we do." The translator struggled with the concept, producing a series of confused beeps before finally managing. "Not understand. Humans help. For nothing?" Elena looked around at her crew. Chen with his arms crossed and a grim expression. "Doctor." Kim already preparing medical supplies, the others standing ready to assist however they could. She saw her own confusion and determination reflected in their faces. "Yes," she said simply. "For nothing." What followed was the most intensive medical effort in the station's history. Dr. Kim worked tirelessly to synthesize nutrients that the alien family could process, while Chen and the engineering team modified one of the station's guest quarters to accommodate their unique atmospheric needs. The process wasn't easy. The aliens, who called themselves the Kythera, they learned, required a complex mixture of trace elements that had to be precisely balanced. Too much of one compound would be toxic. Too little of another would be useless. Elena found herself assigned as the primary liaison, partly because of her xenobiology background, and partly because the alien mother, who gave her name as something that translated roughly as gentle wing that sings, seemed to trust her more than the others. As the hours passed and the medical treatments began to take effect, Elena learnt more about their unexpected guests. The Kythera came from a world in the spiral arm, far beyond human space. They were a peaceful species, primarily focused on art and philosophy, with little experience in interstellar warfare, which made their current situation all the more tragic. "The Devourers came to our world 3 cycles ago," Gentle Wing That Sings explained during one of their conversations, her children finally sleeping peacefully in the modified quarters. Her own condition had improved dramatically with proper nutrition, though Elena could see the emotional toll still etched in every line of her alien features. "Devourers?" Eleanor asked. "A species that consumes. They take worlds, strip them of resources, enslave or kill populations. They came to our world with great ships, like floating cities. Our defenses were inadequate." The story that emerged over the following days was one that Elena had heard variations of before, though never in such personal terms. A technologically advanced but peaceful species encounters a hostile conquering force. The peaceful species is overwhelmed, their world stripped bare, their people scattered to the solar winds. "I managed to escape with my children in one of our last functioning ships," Gentle Wing continued. "But the journey has been difficult. Our supplies ran low weeks ago. The children began to weaken, and I began to despair." Elena watched the 3 young Kythera playing with some simple toys that Chen had fabricated for them. Despite their ordeal, they seemed remarkably resilient. Children, she reflected, were the same everywhere. Quick to adapt, quick to trust, quick to find joy even in the darkest circumstances. "What were you planning to do?" Elena asked gently. "When you reached our space?" Gentle Wing's multifaceted eyes dimmed slightly. "I had heard rumors of a human research station. Stories said that humans sometimes Traded for things. I thought perhaps I could find someone who would take me and my children as servants, or... She paused, unable to continue. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The implications were clear and horrible. This desperate mother had been prepared to sell herself and her children into slavery just for the chance that they might survive.
You won't have to do that, Elena said firmly.
Not here, not ever. But I must offer payment, Gentlewing insisted. I have little left, but I have knowledge of the devourers, of their ships and weapons. Perhaps this has value? Elena considered this. Intelligence about a hostile alien species would definitely be valuable to Earth Command, but looking at this traumatized family, the last thing she wanted to do was immediately turn them into military assets. We'll discuss that later, she said. Right now, focus on getting better. You and your children are safe here. That evening, Elena called a meeting of the station's senior staff. The debate was intense but brief. They all agreed that the Kythera family would be given sanctuary for as long as they needed it. But we need to report this to Earth Command, pointed out Dr. Williams, the station's communication officer. An unknown alien species with intelligence about a hostile force? They'll want to know immediately, and they'll want to take them. Chen added grimly, turn them into intelligence assets. Separate the mother from her children for security reasons. The whole military intelligence playbook.
Elena had been thinking about this very problem.
Then we don't tell Earth Command. Not yet. The room erupted in protests, but Elena held up her hand. Look, I'm not suggesting we hide this forever, but these people have been through hell. They need time to recover, to process what happened to them. And more importantly, they need to understand that not all species in this galaxy are like the Devourers. Elena, we're talking about violating direct orders, Dr. Williams said. Earth Command requires immediate reports of all alien contact. Earth Command isn't here, Elena replied. We are. And right now, we're the only thing standing between that family and either death or exploitation. Over the next several days, as the Kythera family continued to recover, Elena began to understand the true scope of what humanity was facing. The Devourers weren't just another aggressive species. They were a galactic plague, spreading from world to world, consuming everything in their path. They have taken 17 systems in the past 50 cycles, Gentlewing explained during one of their evening conversations. Each time, they grow stronger, their fleets larger. They incorporate the technology of conquered species, turning it into weapons of war. Elena felt a chill as she realized the implications. 17 systems meant potentially billions of lives lost. And if the Devourers continued their expansion, they would inevitably come into contact with human space. But what struck her most about these conversations wasn't the military intelligence. It was the profound gratitude and confusion that Gentlewing expressed about human behavior. I do not understand your species, she said one evening, watching her children play with Elena in the station's small recreation area. You help us, ask for nothing, treat us as equals. This is not the way of the galaxy. What do you mean? Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew. In our travels fleeing the Devourers, we encountered other species. The hegemony of Rex demanded payment in rare minerals we did not have. The Republic of Sal would have helped, but only if we signed contracts of servitude. The trade lords offered food for my children, but wanted me to. She trailed off, but Elena understood. Every species we met saw us as something to be used, exploited, or ignored. You are the first to simply help. Elena looked at the three young Kythera, now laughing as they chased a ball around the room. Their recovery had been remarkable. Proper nutrition and a safe environment had worked wonders. They were still obviously traumatized, but children were resilient everywhere in the universe. Maybe that's why we need to help, Elena said quietly, because no one else will. That night, Elena made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. She opened a personal communication channel to her brother, Admiral James Vasquez, one of Earthfleet's rising stars. The conversation was coded as a family message, buried in the routine personal communications that flowed between the frontier and Earth. She told him everything. Jesus, Elena, James said after she'd finished her report. Do you realize what you've done? The diplomatic protocols alone. I know exactly what I've done, Elena interrupted. I've saved a family, and I've given us intelligence about a threat that could endanger every human world. There was a long pause, as James considered this. Finally, he sighed. Okay. I can bury this in classified channels. Keep it away from the bureaucrats for now. But Elena, I can't protect you forever. Eventually, Someone's going to want to know why you didn't report this immediately. By then, hopefully, it won't matter, Elena said. James, you need to understand. This isn't just about following protocols. This family trusted us when they had no reason to. They're watching how we handle this situation, and through them, the rest of the galaxy will be watching too. What do you mean? Elena looked through the viewport at the star-filled darkness beyond. The Devourers are coming, whether we're ready or not. When that happens, we're going to need allies. Real allies. Not species that help us because of trade agreements or mutual defense pacts. We need species that help us because they believe in what we stand for. And you think showing kindness to one refugee family is going to accomplish that? I think showing kindness to one refugee family is how we start. 3 weeks after the arrival of the Kythera family, Research Station Kepler 442 received an unexpected visitor. The sleek diplomatic vessel that emerged from hyperspace bore the distinctive markings of the Galactic Trade Consortium, one of the 3 major power blocks that dominated this region of the galaxy. Elena watched from the observation deck as the ship approached, her stomach knotting with apprehension. Beside her, Gentle Wind That Sings stood silent. Her children clustered around her legs like small shadows. They come for us, the Kythera mother said quietly, her translated voice carrying a resignation that broke Elena's heart. No, Elena said firmly. They don't. But even as she spoke the words, Eleanor wondered if she could keep that promise. The consortium delegation was led by Ambassador Thex Corvani, a member of the reptilian Sauridian species who had been dealing with human expansion for the better part of a decade. Thex Corvani was known for being practical, efficient, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting consortium interests. Elena met the delegation in the station's small conference room, with Dr. Chen and Dr. Kim flanking her. The atmosphere was tense from the moment the Sauridians stepped aboard. Dr. Tippling Vasquez. Ambassador Thex Corvani began without preamble, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. We understand you are harboring refugees from the recent Kythera incident. Elena kept her expression carefully neutral. We've provided humanitarian aid to survivors of what appears to have been an attack on their homeworld. Humanitarian aid, Thex Corvani repeated, the universal translator making his tone sound almost amused. How quaint. Dr. Vasquez, are you aware that the Kythera possess detailed intelligence regarding Devourer fleet movements and capabilities? I'm aware they've suffered under Devourer aggression, yes. Then you're also aware that such intelligence is extremely valuable. The consortium has legitimate salvage claims on any Kythera technology or information recovered from this sector. Elena felt her temper flare but kept her voice level. These aren't salvage, Ambassador. They're people. They are refugees with no legal standing in this sector, Thex Corvani corrected smoothly. Under galactic maritime law, they fall under consortium protection. We're here to collect them and provide them with appropriate accommodations. Elena had been dreading this moment since the day Gentle Wing arrived. The Galactic Trade Consortium operated on principles that were fundamentally opposed to human values. They saw everything in terms of profit and loss, assets and liabilities. To them, the Kythera family wasn't a group of traumatized survivors. They were a valuable resource to be exploited. I'm afraid that's not possible, Elena said. Thex Corvani's serpentine eyes narrowed. Dr. Vasquez, I don't think you understand the situation. This is not a request. The consortium has legitimate authority in this sector, and these refugees are under human protection, Elena interrupted. As long as they remain on this station, they're under the jurisdiction of Earth authorities. Your little research station hardly constitutes Earth authority, Thex Corvani hissed, his polite diplomatic mask beginning to slip. You have 12 personnel and no military assets. The consortium has 3 heavy cruisers in this system. Do you really wish to test the strength of your convictions against our firepower? Elena felt Chen tense beside her, but she kept her own posture relaxed. Are you threatening a human installation, Ambassador? I am explaining the realities of the situation. The consortium has invested significant resources in maintaining order in this sector. We will not allow one human research station to undermine our authority. Then I suppose we're at an impasse. The negotiation continued for another hour, with Thex Corvani alternating between legal arguments, veiled threats, and offers of compensation. Through it all, Elena remained firm. The Kythera family would not be turned over to the consortium. Finally, the Sauridian ambassador played his final card. Dr. Vasquez, You should know that we have been monitoring communications from your station. We're aware that you've been in contact with Earth Fleet Command regarding this matter, specifically with Admiral Vasquez, your brother, I believe? Elena's blood ran cold, but she showed nothing. I don't know what you're talking about. Come now, Dr. Carter. Vasquez. We both know that Earth Fleet is already planning a response to the Devourer threat. The intelligence these Kathira possess could be crucial to human survival. Are you really going to let your misguided compassion doom your own species? It was a masterful manipulation, and Elena had to admit it struck home. The thought that her actions might somehow harm humanity's chances against the Devourers was a fear that had kept her awake for the past several nights. But then she thought of Gentle Wing's children, playing in the station's recreation area without fear for the first time in months. She thought of the way Gentle Wing herself had begun to smile. Tentatively, carefully, but genuinely, when she talked about the future instead of just survival. The Kythera family will share their knowledge with Earth Fleet Command when they choose to, Alina said, as free beings making their own decisions, not as property being handed over to new masters. Thex Corvani's expression darkened. You are making a serious mistake, Dr. Vasquez, one that will have consequences far beyond this station. After the consortium delegation departed, Elena called an emergency meeting of the senior staff. The mood was grim. They're not going to give up, Dr. Feud, William said bluntly. The consortium doesn't take no for an answer, especially not from a single research station.
Then we need backup, Chen said.
Elena, you have to contact Earth Command officially. We need fleet protection. Elena had been wrestling with this decision for weeks. Involving Earth Command would protect the station and the Kathera family, but it would also mean turning Gentle Wing and her children into military assets. They would be safe, but they wouldn't be free. There might be another option, Dr. Kim said slowly. Elena, what if we shared their story?
What do you mean?
I mean, what if we told the galaxy what really happened here? Not the official reports, not the diplomatic cables, but the real story. A human research station taking in refugee children asking for nothing in return. The consortium threatening to take them by force. Chen looked skeptical. Sarah, we're not politicians. How do we share a story across the galaxy? The same way stories have always been shared, Kim replied. We tell it to people who tell it to other people. Eleanor, you have contacts throughout the scientific community. I have medical colleagues on a dozen different worlds. Williams has communication officer friends throughout human space. You're talking about starting a propaganda campaign, Elena said. I'm talking about telling the truth, Kim corrected. The question is whether the truth is worth spreading. Elena thought about this for a long moment. Then she thought about something Gentle Wing had said during one of their conversations. Your species helps for nothing. This is not the way of the galaxy. Maybe it was time to change the way of the galaxy. Do it, Elena decided. But we do it right. No editorializing, no political spin. Just the facts. What happened, how it happened, and why it matters. Over the next few days, the story of Research Station Kepler 442 began to spread through informal channels across human space. Medical personnel shared it with their colleagues. Communication officers mentioned it in personal messages home. Scientists discussed it at conferences and in academic forums. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dr. Amanda Foster, Chief of Xenobiology at the Tau Ceti Research Institute, was the first to publicly comment on the situation. Her statement, published in the Journal of Interspecies Studies, was simple and direct. Dr. Vasquez and her team have demonstrated the highest principles of scientific ethics and human decency. Their actions reflect the values that make humanity worth defending. Similar statements began appearing throughout human academic and military circles. Within a week, Elena was receiving messages of support from colleagues she hadn't spoken to in years, from military officers she'd never met, and from civilians across human space who had somehow heard the story. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Elena, Dr. Williams called from the communication station, his voice tight with excitement. You need to hear this. We're receiving a priority message from the hegemony of Rex. Elena hurried to the communication center, where Williams was already bringing up the incoming transmission. The figure who appeared on the screen was a member of the crystalline Vrex species. Tall, angular, with a body that seemed to be made of living mineral. Research Station Kepler 442. The Vrex began, their voice producing harmonics that made the translator work overtime. I am Prime Scholar Zex Thanis of the Vrex Educational Consortium. We have received disturbing reports regarding the situation at your station. Eleanor felt her heart sink. Another alien power interested in the Kythera intelligence. We understand, Zexthanis continued, that you have provided sanctuary to Kythera refugees, asking nothing in return. We understand that the Galactic Trade Consortium has threatened you for this action. This is unexpected. Unexpected? Elena asked. Humans are known to the hegemony as traders and explorers. We did not know you were also capable of mercy without profit. This changes certain calculations. Over the next hour, Elena learned that the story of the Kythera family had spread far beyond human space. The informal networks that connected the galaxy's academic, scientific, and even criminal communities had carried the tale to species and worlds that Elena had never heard of. And the reactions were varied and intense. The consortium model assumes that all species act from self-interest, Zexthanis explained. Your actions suggest this assumption is incomplete. This has implications for many of our current policies and alliances. Elena began to understand that she and her crew had accidentally stumbled into something much larger than a simple humanitarian crisis. They had challenged one of the fundamental assumptions that govern galactic politics, that species only helped others when there was something to gain. Prime Scholar, Elena said carefully, what exactly is the hegemony proposing? The hegemony values knowledge above all other considerations. Your research station has produced knowledge of a new kind, knowledge about the nature of interspecies compassion. We would like to observe this phenomenon more closely. Observe how? We would like to station a permanent observer at your facility, and we would like to offer our protection against consortium interference. Elena looked at Chen, who nodded slowly. The hegemony of Rex was one of the galaxy's major military powers, easily capable of standing up to the consortium, but Elena had learned to be suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true. What would the hegemony want in return? Zexthanis was quiet for a long moment. We would want to understand. Your species helps the Kythera for no gain. Expects no payment, offers no strings attached to your aid. This is unprecedented in our experience. We want to study this behavior, learn from it, perhaps incorporate it into our own policies. Elena felt a strange mixture of pride and unease. It was gratifying to know that human compassion was seen as unique, but troubling to think of it being studied like a laboratory specimen. We'll need to discuss this, Elena said. Of course. But Dr. Vasquez, you should know that you and your colleagues have already changed the galaxy more than you realize. Word of your actions has reached species throughout this sector. Some, like the hegemony, find your behavior intriguing. Others find it threatening. And still others see it as an opportunity. After the transmission ended, Elena sat in the communication center for a long time, staring at the blank screen. What had started as a simple act of compassion, feeding some hungry children, was apparently reshaping galactic politics. Elena? Chen's voice broke into her thoughts. You okay? Marcus, what have we done? We helped a family in need. Everything else is just consequences. Elena nodded slowly. He was right, of course. They had made the only choice they could make, the only choice that aligned with their values as human beings. But as she looked out at the stars beyond the station's viewports, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that those consequences were going to be far more complex than any of them had imagined. Later that evening, Elena found Gentlewing That Sings in the station's observation lounge, watching the stars with her children. The young Kythera had adapted remarkably well to life on the station and were now almost fully recovered from their ordeal. The galaxy speaks of us, Gentlewing said without turning from the viewport. How do you know? Your people think the Kythera know little of galactic communication networks. But we were explorers once, before the Devourers came. We have ways of listening. Elena joined her at the viewport, watching as one of the children drew pictures on a tablet Chen had given him. Are you concerned? Elena asked. Concerned? No. But I am confused. Your species has made us famous throughout the galaxy simply for showing us kindness. This troubles me. Why? Gentlewing turned to look at Elena with those deep, multifaceted eyes. Because it suggests that kindness is so rare in the galaxy that it becomes news when someone demonstrates it. This is a sad thought. Elena had to agree. The idea that basic compassion was so unusual that it qualified as galactic news was deeply disturbing. But perhaps, Gentlewing continued, this is also an opportunity. If your species is unique in showing kindness without expectation of reward, then perhaps you can teach others to do the same. Elena watched the Kythera children playing, oblivious to the political forces swirling around them. They were laughing now, something that would have been unthinkable when they first arrived. Is that what we're doing? Elena asked. Teaching compassion? Perhaps, Gentlewing replied. Or perhaps you are simply being yourselves, and the galaxy is learning by example. That night, Elena drafted a message to Admiral Vasquez. But instead of a request for military protection or political intervention, she sent something else entirely, a proposal. James, she wrote, I think it's time for humanity to make a statement. Not with weapons or diplomacy, but with actions. What if we formalized what we did here? What if we created a network of stations dedicated to helping refugees, disaster victims, anyone who needs aid without asking for payment? I know it sounds naive, but I think we're onto something here. The galaxy is watching us, and right now they're seeing something they've never seen before. Let's give them more to see. Elena sent the message and then sat back to wait. She had no idea whether her brother would take the proposal seriously or whether Earth Command would be interested in what amounted to an interstellar charity operation. But she knew that somewhere in the galaxy, other families like Gentle Wings were fleeing from disasters, looking for safety, hoping for mercy. And she knew that humanity had the power to provide that mercy, if they chose to do so. The question was whether they would. 6 months after the arrival of the Kythera family, Admiral James Vasquez stood in the bridge of the Earth Fleet dreadnought Defiance, watching as construction crews put the finishing touches on Sanctuary Station Alpha. The massive facility hung in space like a metallic flower, its 5 arms extending outward from a central hub, each arm designed to accommodate different atmospheric and environmental requirements. Elena's proposal had been met with skepticism at Earth Command, but the political ramifications of the Kepler 442 incident had been impossible to ignore. The story of humanity's compassion had spread throughout the galaxy, fundamentally altering how other species viewed human expansion. More importantly, it had created opportunities that traditional diplomacy never could have achieved. Admiral, called Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, Marcus Chen's cousin, as it happened, from the communication station. We're receiving a priority transmission from Sanctuary Station Alpha. Doctor, Vasquez is requesting permission to begin operations. James smiled. His sister had been appointed as the first director of the Human Refugee Assistance Network, a position that officially didn't exist in any Earth Fleet organizational chart but had somehow accumulated significant resources and authority. Permission granted, James said. And tell my sister congratulations. Sir, there's more. We're showing 17 ships on approach vectors to the station. Representatives from 14 different species all requesting assistance or sanctuary. James felt a chill of anticipation. The network was about to face its first real test. On Sanctuary Station Alpha, Elena watched the approaching ships with a mixture of excitement and terror. Each vessel represented a different species, a different crisis, a different opportunity to prove that humanity's compassion wasn't just a one-time anomaly. Status report, she called to her expanded staff. The station now housed nearly 200 personnel from various Earth agencies. Ship 1 is a hegemony of Rex Medical Transport, reported Dr. B.U. Kim now serving as the station's chief medical officer. They're carrying refugees from the Keth Prime disaster. Apparently, a mining operation went wrong and contaminated half a continent. Elena nodded. The Keth Prime incident had been all over the Galactic news feeds. A failed attempt to extract rare minerals from a planetary core had resulted in massive geological instability, forcing the evacuation of nearly 1 million Vrex citizens. Ship 2 is more interesting, continued Dr. Williams, who had been promoted to Chief Communications Officer. It's a trade consortium vessel, but they're not here officially. Captain identifies himself as, let me get this right, Thrain Mollusk, requesting asylum. Elena raised an eyebrow. A consortium captain requesting asylum was either a trap or a sign that their influence was spreading in unexpected directions. Ships 3 through 7 are carrying survivors from the outer spiral conflicts, Doctor. Kim continued. Mixed species, mostly civilian populations fleeing the expansion of something called the Unity Collective. Elena had heard disturbing reports about the Unity Collective, a species that seemed to absorb other sentient races into their consciousness, stripping away individual identity in favor of a collective mind. The refugee crisis they were creating in the outer spiral was massive and growing. Ships 8 through 12 are unusual, Williams said, checking his readings twice. They're from the rogue worlds, species we've never had formal contact with. According to their transmissions, they're here because they've heard about what happened at Kepler PDF 442. Elena felt that familiar mix of pride and unease. The rogue worlds were independent systems that had rejected membership in any of the major galactic powers, surviving through a combination of isolation and neutrality. If they were coming to human space, it suggested the network's reputation had spread even further than she had imagined. Ships 13 and 14? She asked. Unknown configurations, Williams admitted, but they're broadcasting standard distress codes and requesting humanitarian assistance. Elena looked around the station's command center, a far cry from the small research facility where this had all begun. But despite the advanced technology and expanded staff, the mission remained the same. Open channels to all approaching vessels, Elena ordered. Inform them that Sanctuary Station Alpha is prepared to provide assistance to any sentient beings in need, regardless of species, political affiliation, or ability to pay. Elena, Dr. Kim said quietly, we're about to take on refugees from 5 different ongoing conflicts, including some we've never had contact with before. Are we sure we're ready for this? Elena thought of Gentle Wing That Sings, and her children, now living peacefully on New Geneva, one of humanity's agricultural worlds. The former refugee had become something of a celebrity, the first Cathera to address a human academic conference, sharing her species' knowledge of sustainable farming techniques in exchange for the sanctuary her family had received. No, Elena said honestly, we're not ready. But that's never stopped us before. The next 72 hours tested every system on Sanctuary Station Alpha. The Vrex refugees from Keth Prime required specialized atmospheric processes to deal with their silicon-based biology. The Trade Consortium captain, Thrain Mollusk, turned out to be a genuine defector whose own people were hunting him for refusing to participate in slave raids against primitive worlds. The survivors from the Unity Collective expansion were perhaps the most challenging. Dozens of species Elena had never seen before, many suffering from the psychological trauma of watching their friends and family members absorbed into the collective's hive mind. But the biggest surprise came from ships 13 and 14. Elena, Williams called from his station, his voice tight with excitement. You need to see this. The unknown ships, they're not refugees at all. Elena hurried to the communication center, where Williams was displaying the transmission from the lead unknown vessel. The figure on the screen was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. A being that seemed to be composed of shifting patterns of light and energy. Vaguely humanoid, but clearly not bound by physical matter in the way most species were. Sanctuary Station Alpha, the being began, its voice producing harmonics that made the translator struggle. I am speaker for the Wandering Light, representative of the... Your translators will struggle with this, the Transcendent Collective. Elena felt a chill. Another collective species? We have traveled far to reach your station, speaker for the Wandering Light continued. Not seeking sanctuary, but offering assistance. I don't understand, Elena said. Your species has created something new in the galaxy. Help without expectation of reward, mercy without payment, sanctuary without condition. This is unprecedented. The Transcendent Collective wishes to support this endeavor. Over the next hour, Elena learned that the Transcendent Collective was nothing like the Unity Collective that had been terrorizing the Outer Spiral. Where the Unity absorbed other species, the Transcendents were a voluntary association of energy beings who had evolved beyond physical form but retained their individuality and compassion. We have observed the galaxy for millennia, Speaker for the Wandering Light explained. We have seen empires rise and fall, species flourish and become extinct, wars that devastated entire sectors. But we have never seen what your species has created. Systematic compassion. Systematic compassion? Elena asked. Most species show mercy occasionally, to their own kind or to allies who can provide reciprocal benefits. Your species has created a system dedicated to helping any being in need, regardless of politics, biology, or utility. This is evolution of a kind we have never observed. Elena felt overwhelmed by the implications. What kind of assistance are you offering? Knowledge? Resources? Protection if necessary. The Transcendent Collective has no need for territory or material wealth. But we value compassion as the highest form of evolution. We wish to help your species spread this gift throughout the galaxy. The offer was staggering. The Transcendents possessed technology that made even Earth fleet's most advanced systems look primitive. Their knowledge spanned millions of years of galactic history, and they were offering it all to support humanity's refugee assistance network. But Elena had learned to be cautious of gifts that seemed too good to be true. What would you want in return? She asked. To learn, Speaker for the Wandering Light replied simply. Your species has achieved something that our vast knowledge and ancient wisdom have not prepared us for. We wish to understand how being still bound by physical form can demonstrate such universal compassion. Elena looked around the command center, where her staff was working frantically to process refugees from half a dozen different crises. The station's medical bays were filled with injured beings. Its living quarters housed families from species that had never met before. Its engineering teams were improvising solutions to environmental requirements they had never encountered. It was chaos. It was exhausting. It was probably unsustainable in the long term. And it was the most important thing humanity had ever done. We accept your assistance, Elena said, with gratitude. What followed was the most rapid expansion in the history of human space operations. Within 6 months, the Human Refugee Assistance Network had grown from a single station to a dozen facilities scattered across human space and beyond. Each station was equipped with transcendent technology that could adapt to the needs of virtually any known species. But more importantly, the network had begun to inspire imitators. Elena was reviewing the weekly status reports when Dr. Williams approached with a communication that would change everything again. Elena, we're receiving a priority transmission from the hegemony of Rex. It's significant. The figure that appeared on Elena's screen was Prime Scholar Zex Thanis, but they were not alone. Behind them, Elena could see representatives from a dozen different species. Some she recognized, others completely alien. Director Vasquez, Zex Thanis began formally. I am pleased to inform you that the hegemony of Rex has decided to establish its own refugee assistance network, modeled on humanity's example. Elena felt her heart skip. That's wonderful news, Prime Scholar. We are not alone in this decision. The Spiral Federation, the Independent Systems Alliance, and even several rogue world coalitions have announced similar initiatives. Your species has created something that the galaxy desperately needed. Elena looked at the assembled representatives, former enemies working together, species that had never cooperated before, united by a common purpose. But we face a challenge, Zex Thanis continued. Each network operates according to the principles and capabilities of its founding species. The Hegemony Network prioritizes scientific refugees and educational resources. The Federation Network focuses on agricultural, worlds, and environmental disasters. The Alliance Network specializes in economic refugees and trade disruptions. Elena began to see the problem. You need coordination. We need leadership, Zex Thanis corrected. The species that created the concept of systematic compassion should lead the effort to make it truly galactic. Elena felt the weight of the moment. They were being asked to coordinate a network that would span the entire galaxy, helping refugees from conflicts and disasters they could barely imagine. I'll need to consult with Earth Command, Elena said. Of course. But Director Vasquez, you should know that this is not merely about logistics or administration. Word of the human refugee networks has reached the areas threatened by both the Devourers and the Unity Collective. For the first time in decades, populations in those regions have somewhere to flee. You have given hope to billions of beings who had accepted that they were doomed. After the transmission ended, Elena sat in her office for a long time, staring out at the stars beyond the station's viewport. Somewhere out there, the Devourers continued their relentless expansion, consuming worlds and enslaving populations. The Unity Collective spread like a virus, absorbing individual consciousness into their hive mind. Traditional galactic powers maneuvered for advantage, treating other species as resources to be exploited. And yet, in the midst of all that darkness, something new had emerged. Something that had started with one desperate mother offering everything she had to save her children, and one research station that decided to help without asking for payment. Elena thought of Gentle Wing That Sings, now serving as a cultural liaison between humanity and the Cathera refugees settling on New Geneva. She thought of Captain Thrane Mollusk, who had used his knowledge of consortium slave routes to help the network rescue dozens of other victims. She thought of the thousands of beings now living safely on human worlds, contributing their knowledge, skills, and cultures to a growing community of the rescued and the rescuing. Director, Dr. Kim's voice interrupted her thoughts. We've got new arrivals on approach. Looks like survivors from the Krellin system. Apparently the Devourers hit them 3 days ago. Elena stood and straightened her uniform. The work continued, crisis by crisis, family by family, one act of compassion at a time. Prepare the medical bays, Elena ordered, and send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we're going to need more ships. As she headed toward the docking bay to personally greet the newest refugees, Elena reflected on how much had changed since that day when a dying alien ship had tumbled out of hyperspace toward Kepler 442. They had set out to help one family. Instead, they had sparked a revolution that was reshaping the galaxy. And they were just getting started. 2 years after the establishment of the Galactic Refugee Assistance Network, the war began. Elena stood in the command center of Sanctuary Station Prime, the massive facility that now served as headquarters for humanitarian operations spanning 3 galactic arms, watching the tactical display with growing dread. Red indicators showed Devourer fleet movements throughout the outer spiral, while purple marks tracked Unity Collective expansion in the coreward sectors. But it was the green indicators that worried her most. Dozens of refugee convoys fleeing toward human space and allied networks, each one representing thousands of displaced beings seeking the sanctuary that humanity had promised to provide. Director, called Commander Reese, the former Earth Fleet officer who now served as Elena's military liaison. Priority transmission from Admiral Vasquez. You're going to want to take this privately. Elena nodded and retreated to her secure office, where James's image materialized in holographic detail. Her brother looked older than his 45 years, the weight of command evident in every line of his face. Elena, we've got a problem. James began without preamble. Earth Command has been monitoring the refugee flows, and the numbers are unsustainable. Elena felt a chill of foreboding. How unsustainable? In the past 6 months, we've absorbed nearly 3 million refugees across all human worlds. The transcendent enhanced food production systems are keeping up, barely, but the social integration issues are becoming serious. Some colonies are reporting that refugees now outnumber original human settlers. Elena sank into her chair. She had been so focused on the moral imperative of providing sanctuary that she hadn't fully grasped the demographic implications. James, these are people fleeing for their lives. We can't just turn them away. I'm not suggesting we do. But Elena, we need to understand what's happening here. The refugee networks aren't just providing humanitarian aid anymore. They're fundamentally altering the population dynamics of this entire galactic region. Eleanor pulled up the statistics on her personal display and felt her stomach drop. The numbers were staggering. In just 2 years, the combined refugee networks had relocated over 50 million beings. Entire species had been transplanted from their homeworlds to new colonies. Traditional population centers were being abandoned as people fled toward the safety of the networks. It gets worse, James continued. Intelligence reports suggest that both the Devourers and the Unity Collective are deliberately targeting worlds with established evacuation routes to the networks. They're using our compassion against us, forcing population displacement on a massive scale.
What do you mean?
Think about it, Elena. Every time we successfully evacuate a world's population, we validate the strategy of abandoning territory instead of fighting for it. We are accidentally encouraging species to give up their homeworlds without resistance. Elena felt the familiar weight of unintended consequences settling on her shoulders. Every solution seemed to create new problems. Every act of compassion seemed to enable new forms of suffering. There's more, James said grimly. The Galactic Trade Consortium has declared the refugee networks a threat to regional stability. They're claiming that the mass population movements are disrupting established trade routes and political boundaries. Let me guess, they want to shut us down. Worse, they want to regulate us. The consortium is proposing a new treaty that would place all refugee operations under their oversight. Quotas, screening procedures, mandatory work contracts for asylum seekers. Elena understood immediately. The consortium wanted to transform the refugee networks from humanitarian operations into labor recruitment systems. They would help displaced beings, but only if those beings were willing to work in consortium-controlled industries. Have any of the networks agreed to this? The Rigel Federation is considering it, James admitted. Their refugee populations are straining their agricultural systems, and the consortium is offering significant trade incentives. Elena stared at the tactical display, watching as another refugee convoy emerged from hyperspace. 12 ships carrying survivors from the Thanic colony, a mixed-species settlement that had been overrun by the Unity Collective 3 days earlier. James, what happens if we refuse the consortium's demands? They'll start interdicting refugee ships. They've already begun inspecting convoys for contraband and security threats. It's only a matter of time before those inspections become permanent detentions. Elena made a decision that would define the rest of her life and fundamentally alter humanity's role in galactic politics. Then we protect the convoys. Elena, that's an act of war. The consortium has 3 times our military strength. And the refugees have nothing but hope. James, we didn't start this network to abandon people when things got difficult. We started it because it was the right thing to do. Eleanor, no, listen to me. We made a promise. Every species that comes to us for help, we told them they would be safe. That promise doesn't have escape clauses for political convenience. The transmission ended with James promising to discuss the matter with Earth Command, which Elena knew was code for trying to find a diplomatic solution that didn't involve human fleets fighting consortium cruisers. But Elena was no longer interested in diplomatic solutions. Within hours of her conversation with James, Elena convened an emergency meeting of the Network Coordination Council, representatives from all the major refugee assistance organizations that had been inspired by humanity's example. The gathering took place in Sanctuary Station Prime's largest conference facility, and Elena was struck by how much had changed since that first day when she'd knelt beside a dying Kithara mother. The room now contained representatives from 17 different species, each one committed to the principle of providing aid without expectation of reward. The situation is clear, Elena began, addressing the assembled delegates. The consortium wants to control refugee operations for their own benefit. The Devourers and Unity Collective are exploiting our evacuation efforts to spread terror, and traditional galactic powers are beginning to see our networks as threats to the established order. Prime scholar Zex Thanos spoke first. The hegemony of Rex has reached similar conclusions. Our intelligence suggests that the consortium is planning to blockade human space within the next 6 months. Ambassador Kralthane of the Spiral Federation nodded gravely. The Federation faces the same pressures. Consortium representatives have suggested that our refugee assistance constitutes unfair economic competition. Elena looked around the room at beings who had committed themselves to helping others, now facing the possibility that their compassion would be forbidden by galactic law.
What if we refuse to accept their authority? Elena asked.
The question hung in the air like a physical weight. What Elena was suggesting was essentially a declaration of independence from the established galactic order, a statement that the refugee networks would operate according to their own principles, regardless of what the major powers decreed. The implications would be enormous, warned Speaker for the Wandering Light, the transcendent representative. You would be creating a new power block based on humanitarian principles rather than economic or military strength. And if we don't, Elena countered, if we submit to consortium oversight, how long before the networks become just another form of exploitation? How long before the beings who come to us for help find themselves sold into labor contracts or military service? The debate continued for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. Species that had committed themselves to systematic compassion could not accept a system that would restrict that compassion based on political or economic considerations. The Declaration of Sanctuary was signed by all 17 representatives that evening. In simple, direct language, it stated that the refugee assistance networks would continue to operate according to their founding principles, regardless of pressure from traditional galactic powers. Elena knew that they had just declared war, even if no shots had been fired yet. The first shots came 3 weeks later. Elena was reviewing integration reports from the human agricultural worlds when the alarms began sounding throughout Sanctuary Station Prime. She rushed to the command center, where Commander Rees was coordinating with incoming reports from across the network. Status report, Elena demanded. Consortium forces have interdicted 6 refugee convoys in the past hour, Rees reported grimly. They're claiming security inspections, but intelligence suggests they're preparing to redirect the ships to consortium processing centers.
Elena felt a cold rage building in her chest.
How many people are we talking about? Approximately 40,000 refugees from the Krellin expansion disaster. Elena thought of the Krellin refugees already living on human worlds. Artists, scientists, families who had fled the Devourer advance. The idea of their friends and relatives being processed like cargo by consortium bureaucrats was intolerable. Commander, contact Admiral Vasquez. Tell him we need immediate military support for convoy protection. Ma'am, Earth Command hasn't authorized, then we act without authorization. How many ships do we have in the region? 17 vessels, mostly converted civilian transports with defensive armaments. But Elena, the consortium has deployed heavy cruisers for this operation. Elena looked at the tactical display, where green indicators showed the trapped refugee ships surrounded by red consortium vessels. 40,000 beings, guilty of nothing but seeking safety, about to become pawns in a galactic power struggle. She thought of Gentle Wing That Sings, who had been willing to offer everything, including herself and her children, just for the chance that they might survive. She thought of the thousands of other refugees who had placed their trust in humanity's promise of sanctuary. Launch all available ships, Elena ordered. Full escort formation. Elena, that's an act of war against the consortium. No, Elena said quietly. That's keeping a promise. The Battle of the Kepler Convoy, as it would later be known, lasted only 40 minutes. The converted refugee escort ships were outgunned and outnumbered, but they had advantages the consortium hadn't expected. Transcendent technology had been integrated into the escort fleet, providing shields and weapons far more advanced than anything the consortium possessed. More importantly, the refugee ships themselves had been modified with defensive systems, turning them from helpless victims into active participants in their own protection. When the first consortium cruiser opened fire on a refugee transport, every ship in the convoy responded with coordinated defensive fire. The sight of thousands of displaced beings fighting to protect each other sent a shock through the galactic community that would resonate for years. The battle ended when the consortium forces withdrew, unwilling to face the prospect of slaughtering refugee families in full view of galactic media. But Elena knew that this was just the beginning. "Commander," she called to Reese, "contact all network coordinators. Tell them to prepare for full defensive operations. And send a message to Earth Command. Tell them that the Refugee Assistance Network is officially requesting alliance status with Earth Fleet." "Elena, you're talking about creating a military alliance based on humanitarian principles," Reese warned. "That's never been done before." Elena looked out at the stars, where other convoys were approaching from a dozen different crisis zones. Beings fleeing the Devourer advance, families escaping Unity collective absorption, entire populations abandoning worlds caught in the crossfire of ancient conflicts. "Maybe it's time it was done," Elena said. The response from Earth Command came 12 hours later, in the form of Admiral James Vasquez himself, arriving at Sanctuary Station Prime with a task force of 20 Earth Fleet vessels. Elena met her brother in the station's main docking bay, where the formal ceremony that would change galactic history was about to begin. "Elena," James said as he stepped off his shuttle, "I hope you know what you've started." "I know exactly what I've started," Elena replied. "The question is whether you're going to help me finish it." James looked around the docking bay, where refugees from dozens of different species had gathered to witness the ceremony. Children played among the assembled crowd, their laughter echoing in the vast space. Families that had lost everything except each other stood together, watching as humanity decided whether to stand with them or abandon them to galactic politics. "Earth Command has authorized the formation of the Humanitarian Defense Alliance," James said formally. "Earth Fleet is prepared to provide military protection for all legitimate refugee assistance operations." Elena felt tears she hadn't expected welling in her eyes. "All of them. All of them. Elena, what you've built here isn't just a refugee network anymore. It's a new model for how species can interact with each other. Earth Command has decided that's something worth fighting for." As the crowd erupted in cheers that transcended species barriers, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with one starving alien family offering everything they had for their children's survival. It had grown into a galactic network dedicated to helping anyone in need. And now it was becoming something that had never existed before. A military alliance based not on conquest or trade, but on the simple principle that every sentient being deserved protection and compassion. Elena looked out at the refugees celebrating around them, and realized that they had just declared war on suffering itself. Whether they could win that war remained to be seen. 5 years after the formation of the Humanitarian Defense Alliance, Fleet Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the Dreadnought Sanctuary, watching as the last Devourer ship disappeared into hyperspace, fleeing the combined forces of 17 different species united under a single cause. The Battle of Cathera Prime had lasted 3 days and would go down in history as the turning point in what scholars were already calling the Compassion Wars. For the first time in recorded galactic history, a purely defensive alliance had not only survived a coordinated assault by 2 major aggressive powers, but had actually driven them back. Admiral, called Captain Torres, formerly Dr. Williams from the original research station Kepler, 442, from the communications station. "We're receiving surrender requests from the remaining Unity collective ships in this system." Elena nodded, still feeling the strange unreality of her situation. 3 years ago, she had been a xenobiologist studying alien plant samples. Now she commanded the largest humanitarian fleet in galactic history and held the rank of Fleet Admiral in what had become known as the Alliance Defense Force. "Accept their surrenders," Elena ordered. "Standard protocol, offer them the choice of reintegration therapy or relocation to unpopulated worlds where they can establish individual communities." The Unity Collective's ultimate weakness had proven to be their inability to understand beings who fought for others rather than themselves. Their hive mind could predict and counter selfish motivations, but systematic compassion operated according to principles they couldn't process. Admiral, Captain Torres continued, there's something else. We're receiving a priority transmission from Kythera Prime. It's Gentle Wing that sings. Elena felt her heart skip. The former refugee had become one of the Alliance's most effective diplomatic coordinators, but she was supposed to be safely on New Geneva, not in what had been an active war zone just hours ago. The holographic display activated, showing the familiar form of the Kythera diplomat. But she was not alone. Behind her, Elena could see representatives from dozens of species, many wearing the simple blue armband that had become the symbol of the Alliance. Admiral Vasquez, Gentle Wing began formally, her voice carrying across the vast distances between ships. I bring greetings from the newly formed Coalition of the Rescued. Elena raised an eyebrow. This was not a term she had heard before. The Coalition represents more than 2 million beings who have found sanctuary through the Alliance networks, Gentle Wing continued. Refugees, former prisoners, survivors of conquest and displacement. We have a proposal. Eleanor waited, curious about what this unprecedented gathering might have decided. For too long, the rescued have been seen as burdens to be supported, problems to be solved. But Admiral, we are not problems. We are solutions. We have seen the worst that the galaxy can offer, and we have experienced the best. We know the value of the compassion you have shown us. Elena began to understand where this was going, and felt a thrill of excitement mixed with apprehension. The Coalition formally requests permission to establish our own worlds within Alliance space, Gentle Wing announced. Not as dependent populations, but as full members of the Alliance. We wish to contribute our knowledge, our skills, and our absolute commitment to the principle that no being should face suffering alone. The proposal was staggering in its implications. Elena was being offered the chance to create something that had never existed in galactic history. Worlds populated entirely by beings who had been saved from disaster and who were dedicated to preventing others from experiencing the same fate. Admiral, Gentle Wing continued, there is more. The Coalition has been in communication with refugee populations throughout the galaxy. Word of the Alliance victory has spread to every world, every system, every species that has faced conquest or displacement. They are asking to join us. Elena pulled up the tactical display and felt her breath catch. Green indicators were appearing throughout the galaxy as the communications network carried word of the Alliance victory. Not just refugee ships seeking sanctuary, but established populations on dozens of worlds requesting Alliance membership. How many? Elena asked. Initial estimates suggest nearly 300 systems, Gentle Wing replied. Populations totaling over 5 billion beings. Admiral, they're not seeking aid. They're seeking to join something larger than themselves, a galactic community based on mutual aid and protection. Elena looked around the Bridge of Sanctuary, where her multinational, multi-species crew was monitoring the communications flooding in from across the galaxy. Human officers worked alongside Vrex scholars, Kythera engineers, rescued consortium defectors, and even former Unity Collective drones who had chosen individuality over the hive mind. It was chaos. It was unprecedented. It was probably impossible to manage effectively. And it was the most beautiful thing Elena had ever seen. Gentle Wing, Elena said formally, please inform the Coalition that their proposal is accepted. And send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we're going to need a lot more diplomatic personnel. What followed was the most rapid expansion of organized space in recorded history. The Alliance grew from a humanitarian organization to a fully functional galactic government in less than 2 years, driven by the simple principle that beings who helped each other could accomplish more than beings who fought each other. Elena found herself appointed as the first Chancellor of the Alliance, a position that technically made her the leader of the largest political entity in the galaxy. It was a responsibility that would have terrified her a decade ago, but which now felt like the natural culmination of everything they had been working toward. The Alliance's first official action was the establishment of the Sanctuary Worlds, 47 planets specifically designed to accommodate refugees and displaced populations. Unlike traditional colonies, these worlds were planned from the beginning as multicultural, multi-species communities where beings from different backgrounds could build new lives together. The results exceeded even Elena's most optimistic projections. Chancellor, reported Dr. Cha Kim, now serving as the Alliance's chief medical officer, during a routine briefing, the integration statistics from the Sanctuary Worlds are remarkable. Crime rates are practically non-existent. Technological innovation is accelerating, And cultural exchange is producing art and science that none of the component species could have achieved alone. Elena reviewed the reports with satisfaction. The sanctuary worlds had become showcases of what could be accomplished when beings worked together rather than against each other. But the Alliance's real test came when they encountered species that were not interested in cooperation. The hegemony of conquest had been expanding through the fast spiral for centuries, enslaving primitive worlds and stripping them of resources. They were smaller than the Devourers but more organized than the Unity Collective, and they had no interest in diplomatic solutions. They've demanded that we withdraw from the Astral Reach sector, Admiral James Vasquez reported during a security briefing. Claim that our presence there interferes with their legitimate expansion activities. Alina looked at the tactical display showing the Astral Reach, a region of space that contained nearly 24 inhabited worlds, most of them primitive by galactic standards, but rich in culture and natural resources. What kind of interference are we causing? Elena asked. We're offering the local populations a choice, James replied grimly. Alliance membership with full protection and technological assistance, or continued independence with our guarantee that we won't allow their conquest. Elena understood the problem immediately. The Alliance's mere existence threatened species like the hegemony of conquest because it offered their potential victims an alternative to submission or annihilation. Have the local populations expressed any preference? All 23 inhabited worlds have requested Alliance membership, James said. Chancellor, we're talking about nearly 1 billion beings who want our protection. Elena felt the familiar weight of responsibility. Every choice seemed to lead to larger choices. Every act of compassion seemed to demand greater acts of compassion. Then we give it to them, Elena decided. Send the Fifth Fleet to establish defensive positions throughout the sector. And send a message to the hegemony of conquest. Inform them that the Alliance recognizes the sovereignty of all 23 worlds and will defend that sovereignty against any external threat. The Second Compassion War began when the hegemony of conquest attempted to force their way past Alliance defensive lines. It lasted exactly 18 hours. The hegemony had underestimated both the Alliance's military capabilities and their willingness to fight for beings they had never met. When 500 hegemony ships encountered the Alliance fleet, they found themselves facing not just human vessels, but ships from 37 different species, all crewed by beings who had personal experience with displacement and conquest. The battle was less a military engagement than a demonstration of what happened when systematic compassion was challenged by systematic cruelty. The Alliance forces fought not for territory or resources, but for the principle that no being should face conquest alone. The hegemony surrendered after losing 70% of their fleet in less than a day, but it was the aftermath of the battle that truly changed galactic civilization forever. Chancellor, reported Captain Torres, we're receiving surrender transmissions from hegemony forces throughout the fast spiral. But they're not just surrendering, they're requesting asylum. Elena felt a familiar mixture of surprise and understanding. They want to defect? It appears that the hegemony maintained control of their forces through a combination of propaganda and coercion, Torres explained. When their personnel saw Alliance ships rescuing hegemony survivors instead of executing them, it triggered mass defections. Within weeks, the hegemony of conquest had effectively collapsed, as their own personnel abandoned a system based on oppression for one, based on mutual aid. Former hegemony officers found themselves serving alongside the very beings they had been ordered to conquer, working together to establish new colonies where all species could thrive. Elena stood in her office aboard Sanctuary Station Prime, now the capital of the Alliance, reviewing the final reports on the hegemony integration. Outside her viewport, she could see construction ships building the latest addition to the station. A massive cultural center designed to accommodate artistic traditions from over 100 different species. Quite a journey from feeding a few hungry children, said a familiar voice behind her. Elena turned to see Gentlewing Natsings entering the office, now wearing the insignia of the Alliance Cultural Council. Her children. No longer children, really, had grown up to become engineers working on the sanctuary worlds. Their natural talents enhanced by access to Alliance educational systems. Do you think we've succeeded? Elena asked. Really succeeded, not just in stopping the immediate threats, but in changing how the galaxy works. Gentlewing considered this carefully. Chancellor, when my children arrived at your station, they had never seen beings of different species working together without one group dominating the others. Now they live in a galaxy where such cooperation is normal. Elena nodded, understanding the deeper point. We've changed, Fez.